All right, hey there. Good morning. Welcome to the live event. This is where we do anxiety. We crush the anxiety before it starts. And why am I doing this? Just because I've noticed more and more people talking about anxiety. The in the U.S., we're seeing major changes going on. I watched Impact Theory, Tom Billiard talking, and he's the first one I've actually heard talk about many of the different things that are coming together: the changing world order, the risk to the U.S. dollar losing its dominance, the the way that 16 out of 16 of these times like this that were going on when you had the tension with the changing world order, 12 of them resulted in war. Just talking about a lot of these things and the how people are approaching it based on what they think makes sense, but it's not necessarily what works. So a lot of times principles go out the window when we're talking about anything that has to do with our fight or flight. Now, I think it's a brilliant piece. I'll actually link it onto my seven-step-reset.com/live. I'll put it on that page and you can watch it for yourself. It's about 45 minutes. I understand he goes live on the topic every Wednesday. And it's almost like he's talking to politicians and business leaders because he's wanting them to see that there is a way out of this thing that we're in. If the thing being the changing world order, that tension. So the U.S. has been dominant for the last almost, it's 80-year economic cycle. And we replaced Great Britain as the superpower in 1944 after World War II. And we've ridden that ride, we've ridden that cycle. Now we are in stage 5 of the declines on the decline side, and this has probably been going on for a few years now that we've been in stage 5, and stage 6 is next, and that's when you have all the unrest and the volatility. But we're already seeing that, and this thing has been repeating hundreds of years. Ray Dalio in his book Changing World Order goes back uh, thousands of years, showing how this originally he was able to study it in China because of the dynasties, but then it was the Ottoman Empire giving way to Great Britain, and then the Great Britain giving way to the United States, and now China is the one that's rising, and the U.S. is the one that's declining, and it doesn't have to go in the way that the momentum is going, but you can't just do anything willy-nilly and come out of it. There's several steps that should be taken, and we need to be looking at it principle based. And so if you take the macro and down to the micro, because a lot of this is fractal, and we look at what we're doing ourselves, we're not at our best when we're operating out of fight or flight. Fight or flight tends to put us into what worked before. And if you ever watch a person who has a phobia, essentially what you're seeing is fight or flight on steroids, because they're acting out what they think will make them survive. And whatever the thing is, if it's a spider, their reaction is way overdone based on the spider. But because the fight or flight, it's seeing it as this life or death situation because that's how it was locked into their nervous system. So when you're looking at that, you can see the distinction between what a person does, their behaviors, and what they believe. Because if you try to rationalize about it while they're in a phobia, there's no listening. They're just fighting. So the thing is, the reason I'm doing this daily is to help people gain agency over their own situation so that we are not prone to fight or flight. Hold on a second. We don't want to be prone to fight or flight, and we want to have those tools and access to the tools and resources that we already have to get us through it. This is not mental health. This is, think of it more like mental toughness in sports, but this game we're playing is something we've never played before. And so we have to be at our best. And I use the 7-step reset because while it's designed for transformation, it's still focuses the 100 billion neurons and how each neuron interacts with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. So we have trillions of associations. So the 7-step reset is dealing through the lens of associations, because associations by definition are going to be from the past. Now you can imagine using implementation intentions what you'll do in the future and create associations based on a future event. But generally speaking, the vast majority of our associations are from the past. But if we're going into something new we've never done before, what we did in the past is not going to work. But that doesn't mean we don't have an ability to deal with it, because one of the things we have, that our conscious mind can operate in the realm of infinite possibility. We have our ingenuity to create whatever we want to create. If we can create out of the possibilities, out of the field of possibilities. And this is not law of attraction. This is not manifestation stuff. What I'm wanting to go through here is how these associations work. And when we are in the field of, when we are operating out of our associations versus when we're operating out of our conscious mind, and being able to distinguish those two. And that's the big thing I want you to be able to take away in these sessions, is one, to use the central nervous system in the brain and the conscious mind the way it was designed. And when I say the way it was designed, it's already doing that. But the challenge is it was conditioned based on a model for hunter-gatherers. So if you think about the big operating system that a child is born with, and then it conditions the system so that they can function. Now you can imagine humans grow up in different tribes, different parts of the world in hunter-gatherer days. And this bigger operating system gets them conditioned to what they need for that environment. So from 0 to 7, the majority of the conditioning happens. They're able to get along in the tribe. They know how to hunt. They know how to gather. They know what works, what doesn't work. And as a hunter-gatherer, things didn't change like they change today. So whatever worked from age 0 to 7 is probably still working when they're age 35, how to hunt, gather, tactics, etc. So it made sense that the system is that way. Fast forward 10,000 years, and now look, we've got, with VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, things are changing so rapidly. How do we get ahead of it? And you can't. But what you can do is govern yourself in such a way with the simple, methodical approach that no matter what happens externally, we are able to prevail. And that gets into the Stockdale paradox. Yes, it's hard, but yes, we can prevail. Yes, we will prevail. And that's having those two things exist at the same time is very important. So we want to use the system as it's designed, but not with the conditioning from when we were 0 to 7. We want to reset the conditioning so that it aligns with what we want to accomplish in our life design. The second thing is I want you to start making distinctions and start being able to see the difference between conscious mind thinking versus the associations, the network of neurons. So I'll use the network of neurons in the way that we have typically talked about the subconscious. So if you go back, even it's still recently, you still hear people call it a subconscious mind. It's not a mind, it's the network of neurons. They thought it was a mind because the energy that goes through the neurons is similar to the energy that comes from thought. So thought is energy, the impulse is going through the network of neurons is energy. So when that signal hits our consciousness, it can feel like the same. But we have to be able to distinguish between the two. They are different, and you can tell the difference when it's coming from the network of neurons versus when it's coming from the conscious mind. So if you're interacting with somebody and you see them getting triggered, you know at that moment, or you watch videos, when you see somebody getting triggered, you know at that moment when the triggering is happening. And you know at the moment when the triggering is happening and it starts cycling up really quickly, there's no longer any opportunity to rationalize with the person. Well, you can see signs of that long before it actually starts happening. And that's what the focus is going to be today. So now if you go to I'll put it in the chat here. Let's see. what I'm doing is putting in the website where sort of the home page for these daily events. It's 7stepreset.com/live. And I'll put that is in the chat. And I'll also put in there, if you want to join in and have a conversation, you can do that, and we will I'll see that and then let you in. I'll do that at the Q&A once I get past the download, and each day I'll have a different topic. All right, so each day I'll have a different topic. Now, there'll be resources out there. I'll put the why isn't it not taking? There it is. So that's how you could join on stage. Show. All right. All right, now there's enough. I'm doing this every day, and every day I focus on the 7-step reset. I do it from a different approach. I'll go based on maybe some information I've seen or what I've done the earlier day, and what you'll see is me going through infographics, because one of the things I want us to do is not make this a he said, she said, or a debate. I want it to be based on principles. So if we understand we understand the 100 billion neurons, and that the neurons that fire together wire together. We see that lens, and we understand that. Then the question becomes, okay, so what should we do? What do I want to condition in? And the things that we would want to condition in should be from principles. So I use principles. Great sources, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I like that. Now for business, I like using the Good to Great and Great by Choice, and also Multipliers. So the first 2 books are by Jim Collins. The third one is by Susan Weisman. And then I also use Self-Determination Theory. This is a 900-page book. So much research is into self-determination theory. But one of the takeaways from that book is how we generate, or how we get, intrinsic motivation in others. And so when you start with principles, you can always come up with something that you know is going to work, and you're not questioning it. And that's important when you have agency, because if you don't have certainty in what you are applying, it's so easy to fall back into fight or flight, because we're on edge, we're concerned, etc. Now, one of the things, what I'll do today is continue on step 2. I'll go through all 7 steps, because you may just be joining in right now, but the reason I keep the 7stepreset.com, let me make sure it's there. Yeah, 7stepreset.com/live is there is a video there, and it says, if you're new here, watch this. That goes through the 7-step process. It covers it, and I can keep going. I'll keep going, and it's the 7-step process stays the same. 7-step reset stays the same. But what I do is focus on different areas. So there's so many levers in each of those steps. Yes, it's 7 steps. Let's go there now. Yeah, there's so many levers, and what I want to do is focus on a few levers at a time, but also create context for why we're focusing on a specific lever. Now, yesterday I talked about, I went through all seven, but I started focusing on step two. And today, what I want to do is talk about step two in terms of other people that we're interacting with. And the idea is that, yeah, I mean, every leader would love to, not everyone, but many people would love to be able to change someone else. People want to change their spouse. Leaders want to change their employees. Employees want to change their boss. And this is a way of deflecting or avoiding the hard work that they have to do on themselves. And once you do this inner work on yourself and you're in a place where you have agency, there you will start seeing more and more things in this distinction between the person's behavior, their associations versus when it's mine. You'll start to see that. And I'll tell you that. So using the system the way it was designed is pretty straightforward, right? You don't have to worry when you drive a car, you just get in, start and drive off. You don't have to worry about whether it's a turbocharger or a diesel or an electric vehicle. You just turn it on and press the accelerator. You don't have to worry about how the steering mechanisms work, whether it's, and whether it's independent suspension or live axle. You don't have to worry about that. You just drive the car. And it's similar to that. Lately I've been seeing more and more about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and the animal brain and the hippocampus. And it's like, you don't have to know that to be able to use the 7-step process. This is like driving a car. And you can go there and we can get into that conversation and we can delve into it, but it doesn't really matter because you still press the accelerator to go and you press the brake to stop. As far as the other one, understanding when it's coming from the conscious mind versus the associations, the network of neurons, the subconscious, it's speed. So the subconscious has a reaction time of about a quarter of a second. So this step 3 is a quarter of a second. You'll hear me sometimes say 250 milliseconds. So 250 thousandths of a second is what's happening in this step 3 step. That's the conditioned reaction. And then the conscious mind it doesn't come online for another quarter of a second. So the conscious mind, by the time it comes online, 500 milliseconds have passed. And that's one of the ways that you can tell, am I operating right now out of the conscious or am I operating out of the network of neurons? Because if you're operating out of the network of neurons, then it's going to be much faster and it's quicker. So the network of neurons, step 3, the conditioning, the network of neurons is processing at 11 million bits per second. The conscious mind processes at only 50 bits per second. So that speed differential is one way that you can tell when it's coming out of the associations versus when it's coming out of the conscious mind. And obviously, if we have agency or we're wanting to have agency, then it's important for us to be operating out of our conscious mind. The other one is if it's repeated. So if you have self-talk that comes up over and over, that self-talk is always there. It's the same exact phraseology, the same exact cadence, the same exact tone, then we know that's probably coming from the subconscious. And right, so it's repetition because it's habit, and then speed. 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So most of the reactive things that happen are going to be out of the subconscious. And that's one of the things we want to slow down is the reactiveness. So when you're reacting, it tends to be a survival reaction. And you don't want the reaction to equal the response. So let's go through these steps. Step 1 and 2 are in the pre-stimulus. Step 1 is your beliefs, your command of neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and then physiology. Physiologies, all of these are very important, and all of these can impact the others. My belief can impact how well I can change habits. It impacts my priming. Cognitive biases come into play here. And mindset, if I have a fixed mindset, if I got thrown into a fixed mindset because of an external situation, then my ability to access my habits, my ability to direct my own priming changes, maybe my physiology changes. All of them affect the other. My physiology, if I have a defeated physiology, I may not be able to access all my power. So even if my beliefs are strong, even if I believe I can do something, if my physiology is weak, I may not be able to access that. So we've got to be looking at these. It's like a big circle that you keep going through. And this is where you work on yourself. You work on yourself in these, but the reason why people don't do this, or it's not rewarded, or because remember, dopamine is the habit former, right? So if we're not getting reinforcement that this is working, then we tend not to do it. And the reason why we don't get the reinforcement is because when you're in step 3 and we're reacting, it's like no matter how good you are here, if you're reacting, it doesn't matter, because this is coming from your 0 to 7. When you start changing this to be current, then you start to see the value over here. Now, step 2 is the check-in. Step 2 is the check-in to see where am I here, because if you are low, if you're in a situation that you don't believe you can prevail, like Stockdale paradox, yes, it's hard, but I will prevail. If your belief is, yes, it's hard and I don't stand a chance, then chances are when that stimulus comes, you're going to be on your heels. So this is not only a check-in, but it's also a way for us to get back to where we need to be. And a lot of times the way we'll get back to where we need to be is the physical, using the physiology, and being aware of it is the S. So let me go through this. This step 1 was beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and physiology. Step 2 is your state, your mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional state. And this goes back to the 7 performance areas, which I'll get into later. But those are the first 4, and these are the 4 in the performance areas that we can control. The other 3 are relationships, professional, and financial, but we can control our state, the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. You may not believe you can change or control your state. And that's part of the point here, is we're going to show you that you can. And then the second part of this check-in is the self-image. So what state am I in? And am I high energy or low energy? Am I positive or negative? And then self-image is and you can gauge this by your self-talk. If you've got a lot of negative chatter, whether it's degrading self-talk or reminding yourself of past mistakes or reminding yourself of bad luck that happened, your self-image is going to be a little bit lower than it needs to be for major things that are coming in the stimulus side. So we want to address that. And in that video on 7stepreset.com/live, I do talk about this, and the short version would be, if your self-image, if your self-talk is more degrading, then you want to, when you hear it come up, you'll instantly say, I cancel that, I'm good, or I'm great, or whatever. But you first say, I cancel that. It's not true, I cancel that, I'm great. That's if it's just degrading. So degrading would be, I'm stupid, I'm so stupid, what was I thinking, I'm so stupid, right? That we want to change, because what you're doing is, it's not a mental exercise. This is conditioning. That self-talk is coming from some stimulus that happens either here in step 1, either internally or externally. Something is happening that's triggering that. Maybe you made a mistake. Oh, I'm so stupid. Those 2 things have gotten linked up. We have to break that. So what we're going to do is use associations. And when it comes up, I'm so stupid, I cancel that. I'm learning. I have a growth mindset. I cancel that. I have a growth mindset. I cancel that. This is the learning process. I cancel it. I'm great at life. I cancel that. Many things go my way. Whatever. That you find something that makes sense for degrading self-talk. The second one would be, you made a mistake, a legitimate mistake. You're trying your best. You made a mistake, and you say, oh, I'm no good at this. I can't do this. Then you say, I learned from it instantly, right? You say, I'll never get this. I'm not smart. I don't know how to do this. I'll learn. I'm learning. It's wisdom. Or if it's a mistake that came from the past, it's wisdom. I gained more wisdom. I gained wisdom. I'm learning. And if it's just bad luck, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe you got hit, or whatever. You got a flat tire or late for a meeting. You didn't control that, realistically. And so you can say, that's life. Sometimes life goes my way. And the reason it may seem okie dokie, it's not PMA. This is not reframing stuff. This is not something you've heard before. or you've done before. This is training the subconscious. We are literally creating a new association by repetition. Now, there's other ways to create associations, and we'll do that in the longer workshop. But in this one, just to have something quick that you can do, I'll use that to upgrade your self-image in the moment, right? That's when it's coming in, that's something you can do right away. There are other ways that we can impact the self-image. So we're going to look at the state: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And then one of the ways you can get this leveled up again in the moment is with deep breathing. So keep in mind that we can live seconds without blood, minutes without oxygen, days without water, and weeks without food. Breathing is present in virtually every major Eastern art or in health improvement type discipline. You always have breathing because breath is so important, and breath cleanses the blood, and the blood is how you get nutrients to the brain. So the blood and breathing, in my mind, go together. And you can, I can go on and on. If you read any books on breathing, you'll see there's so many benefits, whether it's catching stopping a cold before it catches, so that you first feel it tickling in your throat. Deep breathing exercises, it cleanses the blood, because that cold is a symptomatic of some imbalance, and the breathing puts it back in there. You want to get back on track. If you're a little bit hyper, breathing. When you're stressed, your breathing is shallow and quick. You can slow it down. So I actually do a breathing ritual: 13 count inhales, 13 count exhales for 10 minutes. I do that every morning while I'm hydrating. So those are the two things. I'm getting my hydration from my brain. I'm getting my breathing. And it's not just getting the oxygen in my system for that moment. It's the anchor. So now during the day, if I feel that any kind of tension coming in, I can take a long, deep breath, and that will slow my system down, because it works both ways. If a person gets anxious or stressed, their breathing gets shallow and quick. If a person slows their breathing down and makes it deeper, the anxiety will reside or subside. And that's one of the quickest ways. The other one I would talk about in here is the S, the spiritual awareness of awareness. You have to be aware of what's going on, and that breathing is a way to become aware. So you can just take a deep breath. In fact, during the day, just box breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 4 counts, 4 counts out, hold that for 4 counts, 4 counts in. And that box breathing gives you a chance to check in with your awareness and see where you are. Now, I talk about awareness. There's many times where people are aware that they're doing something that they said they wouldn't do, and they're aware that they're doing the thing that they said they wouldn't do. So they're aware that they are aware, and they're still not taking action. One of the things we have to build a habit of is make sure that we are consciously choosing to keep doing the thing. Once we're aware that we're aware, we have to, if you want to consciously do that, then consciously do that, but make it a conscious choice. And that's to start taking some of that back. So if you're doom scrolling and you're saying, I know I said I was going to stop at 9 o'clock, and you're still doom scrolling, it's 9:30. If you're aware of that, then stop. Just stop it. Get into the habit of responding to the awareness, because the awareness is who you are. The awareness is your goals. It's from your goals, your visions, your life design. The associations are from the past. It's the habitual, and that's step 3. So step 3 is the stimulus comes in, and then we have a survival reaction that comes from ages 0 to 7, generally speaking. So from 0 to 2, we're in the theta state, and then from 3 to 7, we're in the alpha state. So we learn without trying, and that goes in as habits. It's not conscious, it's associations, it's habitual. It gets locked in later on as our prefrontal cortex forms with this extra additional 20 billion neurons. That makes up the 100 billion. So essentially we get to age 20 with 20 billion neurons not really being fully developed, and they develop during our 20s, and that locks in our conditioning. I'd say that's how we set up our model of the world. And then after that, you hit 30, 35, and everything you do is done by habit, but it's habits based on ages 0 to 7. So the reason this is so important is what this says down here is that we make 33,000 decisions a day. and it's well over 100,000 stimulus response cycles for the average person, because each of these decisions can have several stimulus response cycles. If you look up how many micro stimulus response cycles are there in a second, you'll see something like 2 or 3, and we're awake about 65,000 seconds a day. So if you just look at those numbers, you'll see that, wow, we're making a decision every other second. Well, those aren't conscious decisions, right? You don't remember making 33,000 decisions yesterday. But if you look at it in the context of 95% of everything you do is done by habit, then you see, oh yeah, well, I guess that makes sense. I made about 1,000 decisions yesterday. That's your 5% or so, 1,500 decisions. And this happens over and over. And the last step here is 7, mindfulness. So this is the idea. So this is pre-stimulus. This is the conditioning. This is pre-stimulus. This is conditioning. And this is the response side. And we keep doing this over and over and over 33,000 times. So your response over here is setting you up for your reactions over here. Response to reactions. Your response, it influences the stimulus reaction cycle. So you just keep going around and around. So it makes sense to be able to, one, get back to mindfulness, but also break the chain. And quickly going through the steps, and I'll come back. So you have, after the reaction, then you have a pause, and we want to have step 4 is the response. Step 5 is emotional modulation. So it's a quick check-in. It can be 0 to 90 seconds. Because emotion is energy and emotion. And if you're like heading towards fight or flight, if you feel that energy coming on, then we need to go through that emotional modulation. It doesn't always take 90 seconds, but by 90 seconds, it should have subsided. It's moved on. You don't want to suppress it. If you try to suppress it, it's only going to grow and expand. And then within minutes, it becomes a feeling. Right now, it's locked in this network of neurons, and it becomes accessible, and you'll start experiencing that emotion from other triggered events. By letting it go through it, it doesn't get locked into the network of neurons. And then we have action. So that action, you want that action to be out of consciousness, not out of your associations, not out of your emotional trigger. This is where you stop that triggering, right? It's this emotional modulation part. And this is where the person catches themselves instead of triggering. And that's why I talk about stopping the spiral before it starts. This is where the spiral stops. This is where you catch it. The second choice, you prevent it here, you stop it here. And then after the action, we then go to mindfulness. Now, this area here is where we're checking in ourselves, but I want to talk about it for a few minutes in terms of how it impacts or how we interact with other people. Time. If you can spot when a person is on the way to being triggered, when you can spot when they're getting into the early stages of fight or flight, when the norepinephrine starts to come in, the cortisol starts to build, you can see that. And it's important to understand that when we are in protective mode, when we're into that fight or flight mode, we can't function the same way. So the same way that our cells have 2 configurations. One is when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's in the nutrient seeking phase or configuration, the cells are working well. And they can show this under a microscope, where when those cells are working well, they are devouring the bacteria. When they go into a major threat, they go into protective mode, then they close down. They're no longer going after growth. And we're the same way. A person who gets stressed out goes into a fixed mindset, and they're not able to have a growth mindset. It's very similar. And you can spot that. When you see a person going into a fixed mindset as a leader, as a communicator, someone working with other people, you want to stop. You want to check in, give them a chance to get some psychological air, give them a chance to breathe. Now, we see this early, but because we tend to think that people are in charge of their consciousness or their moment-to-moment behavior, we plow through thinking that it's a choice that they're making. Yet we understand that 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So if you're going to ask, why do I do this every day? Why do I say the same thing every day? People think that they have it, they got this, I don't need that. But yeah, but then if you look at the behavior, it's still the same. We're still treating our situations as though people have full agency over every action, but yet we know that it's 95% is by habit. So what we want to do is intervene, and you can do that by just backing off. If you're making a sale, if you're working on a presentation and you see the person getting a little distracted, pull back. Don't plow through the presentation. It's going to probably be the problem later on in that meeting. So what you do is you back off and say, I just want to check in with you. So how's this landing for you? What's coming up for you right now? Just ask those kinds of questions and give the a person to express what's going on and take a step backwards so that you can keep moving forward. If you plow through, you're heading for that fight or flight, chances are. When you're interacting with employees, when an employee is interacting with their boss, you see that happening. You say, you know what, let me go back and get some more information. I realize I don't have everything. As something I want to check on, I'll come back. That gives them a chance to like regroup and get set. And then now their mental model has already started adjusting because they realize that there's something that they hadn't thought about. Unfamiliarity triggers fight or flight. If they feel like and when you present them with something that's new, that's unfamiliar, it's very easy for them to fall into that fight or flight. By backing off, you give them a chance to kind of reset. And you can do a lot here in this prevention, because once they get triggered, once they're into survival reaction, remember the subconscious, the network of neurons processes at 11 million bits per second, neurons that fire together, wire together. So that anxiety ball is like a snowball rolling downhill. It starts picking up speed and size, and it just gets so big. Here, it's a snowball. Here, it's a snowball rolling down the hill, and a quarter of a second is so quick that once it starts rolling downhill, you can't catch it. And now you're dealing with something that's massive, whereas you could have stopped it here. And this is where you give them the psychological ear, you give them the space. Trying to push through it today makes no sense when you understand this. You want to back off and let it work itself out. Same thing in interacting with your spouse, interacting with any stakeholders that you have. If you're, maybe you're a leader and you are interacting with a board member, these are the moments that you want to just back off, because once they trip over that wire, you're not sure what's going to happen, because now they're operating out of their conditioning and you lost that conscious interaction. And yet people still plow through that. And now the person's already triggered and you just don't get to the result. That's why the things repeat over and over. This is very important. I wanted to go through to bring this home, and I'm going to use infographics. So until I get people coming on stage to join in the conversation, I'm going to use infographics as sort of like a Q&A. All right, now this is Jeff Bezos's, and let me see where I got this from. This is from Nathan Mohart. So I want to give credit to the people where I get these infographics. Back in August, I started collecting infographics, and it was so funny because the algorithm started feeding me more infographics. I very quickly got up to over 400 of them. I turned it into a video You can literally watch the infographics and pick one and then just look at it. So, and what I was doing is wanting to see if they will start repeating, because there's only so many ways to do a thing. But because this is artificial intelligence, probably generating many of these, you can imagine that it's just coming up with different ways of saying it. Like you may see this a similar one, but the rules will be slightly different in terms of their wording, or maybe the sequence is different. But if you want to, what I'm doing with this, the reason I'm doing this is because if you look at his meeting rules, and I can assume that those meeting rules are based on his own trial and error, right? What works, what's worked, then you can assume, well, if that's the case, then it's what I call near principle. So I like to use principles, that's top tier, and then near principles would be mid tier, and then the hit or miss, that's lower tier. I'm not going to build my model off of that. His two pizza rule: limit attendees to those who can be fed with two pizzas. Smaller groups, and this it makes sense. So if you're the running the meeting, by having a small enough group, you can see what's going on here. Let me pull this up so I can come back to it. All right, so you can see there's that same diagram as I talk about it. Yeah, so we want to be able to gauge where people are. This is that state, that check-in, right? Where are people here? Are they stressed? And you can't do that if you're in a much larger group. Plus, people can, I don't want to say hide, but they can get lost and start doing other things. It says it improves communication. It increases accountability in small teams. You can have those one-on-one conversations. You can make sure you're engaging with their conscious mind. If it's a big group, you're just interacting with associations potentially, and people aren't really buying in. There's no engagement at the conscious level. You want conscious level engagement. The next one: no PowerPoints. Always use narrative memos. So PowerPoints kind of put people to sleep. They go into low cognitive mode. We want to keep people in high cognitive mode. This is why stories work so well, because it activates more of the conscious thinking. But it says it forces clear thinking in depth, exposes flaws hidden in bullet points, and avoids oversimplification of complex ideas. It's one of the reasons why I write and why I draw on these pads, and as opposed to using slides, because it's more dynamic. Now, I created this drawing that we're looking at today. I created this yesterday. Tomorrow, I'll start building out the response side. But I wanted to take this pause here because it's sometimes easier to see what's going on in this step 2 in other people than it is in ourselves. But once you see the 2, we both have it. And if we rise up, if our internal rises up, it can trigger the other person. You know, a lot of times our anxiety, or person's anxiety, triggers fear in the other person, and that fear then it's reciprocal, and it scales up. Very, very important to understand that. So no PowerPoint forces clear thinking. And then he says always use narrative memos instead of slides, and it forces you to think. And one thing that it does is it moves us into the future. So all of this, the thing that's consistent is that I want to move us out of the network of neurons and into conscious thinking. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not going to use my network of neurons, but when I am using it, I'm using it for things that make sense because they're from the past. I'm not going to use my associations from the past, and I'm working on something new, some innovation. What worked in the past is not going to be what's right now, especially in today's world, as volatile as it is. And then it avoid simplification of complex ideas. One of the things I run into when I have this conversation with people is they're very quick to label it, to make it make sense as to something that they've had before. And as soon as they make it equal something that they understood before, it loses its power. So this is why I go over it over and over again. I give different examples, because you have to break through that. So in other words, the associations, the network of neurons wants to make it simple and wants to understand it. And that's what it ends up doing. Next thing, you're back to not being able to get it done. This is why people say, I've tried everything. Well, they really haven't tried everything. They've tried the same thing over and over and over. The next one, start with silence. This is I think 20 minutes is a long time, but obviously it works. Look at Amazon. But he does it. He gives the memo out in the meeting. This is great because it's like priming. So now you have your priming going on. You do this. So now you have your priming going on, and you're impacting the priming in the meeting. So it depends on, no matter where people were, they come in, you're priming them with the memo that they're reading about the meeting. And then that's putting them into you're tapping into the spiritual awareness part of it. And you're getting their mind engaged around this particular thing. You're settling the emotions. All of that's happening by having them read the memo. So, we talk about give the memo out in advance. Half the people don't read it. They scan it. But if you give them 20 minutes to read the memo in the beginning of the meeting, they're probably going to read it. That's a very powerful tool here. And I don't know that he did this understanding neuroscience because, well, Amazon was created shortly after neuroscience became more popularized in self-help literature. So he may have, but I think of many of these things, whether you look at military special ops, martial arts training, the way boards operate with the companies that they are leading, you see that best practices are formed over the years, and they're aligned with neuroscience, not because they knew neuroscience, but because what works, works. Right? And then we have leave an empty chair. I like this. This is sort of anchoring. One of the things I did talk about breathing. I said that by having that long, slow breath during the day, I can just take a long breath and I instantly anchor back to that calm state that I had in the morning. So just take that breath. Something goes wrong. It happens sometimes here at doing these live events. There's always some technical thing that goes wrong. And the first thing I do is just take a breath because I don't want to get there's nothing I can do about it but fix it. And fixing it, I have to be at my best. So I just take that breath that anchors me. Having an empty chair, you can point to the chair. That's the customer. You're anchoring the customer. That's a powerful tool. So he has one seat represents the customer in every meeting, keeps users' needs in front and center. And if you ever worked on Amazon on the selling side, if you've sold on Amazon, you can see they're very focused on the customer. It prevents internal bias and it drives customer. So I'm doing this to bring the network of neurons to life. So it's not just some nebulous thing out there. I'm showing you that these infographics were built based on how neuroscience works. And then we have encourage disagreement, then commit. Debate openly, then align fully. It surfaces diverse viewpoints early. Prevent silent disagreement post-decision. It builds trust and faster execution. Now, you have to manage this, but you definitely want people to know that there's going to be opportunity to disagree. And you may have to train that. May have to train that with your team so that they recognize there's no repercussions. Because initially, when you do stuff like this, people are going to be they'll be guarded because it's come back to bite them. But you have to have that open agreement. One of the things I say, like if you want to come on and co-present on this topic, I'll tell you the way we approach this is if we come up with an area that we don't agree on, then I'm going to, if you disagree with me, I will disagree with me until we figure out who's missing information. And I invite them to have that same approach because we don't want to get into this ad hominem attacks just because there's a disagreement. You see this on social media every time. The person challenges something, next thing you know, they're attacking their character. They don't even know them, but it's just their reaction. So we want to make sure that we're stepping into this place of if you disagree with me and I respect your opinion, then I have to disagree with me. And now we can come at this from figuring out who's missing information. And usually what you'll find is it's just more distinctions, more distinctions, more distinctions. And you have the general rule, and then you have some exceptions. And a lot of times what we're arguing about is a person's using an exception and another person's talking about the general rule. So encourage that disagreement and then commit after the conversation is had, because people would rather have you hear what they have to say than to have you do what they want you to do. And that gives them a step to do that. This is like the step 5 in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand before being understood. And then I was just stopping because I was wondering if it was step 4 or step 5. That was that hesitation. It doesn't matter, since 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then we have this last one, end with clear ownership. This is very important. I used to walk into a meeting, I would always carry a folder, and there would be information in the folder. And then when we worked through and I handed, and the assignment was accepted, I would give the folder to that process owner, whoever was going to be owning it. I organized this in advance. I already knew where this was going to go. I probably had conversations with them already. They know they're going to own it. But the act of handing the folder over was a visual confirmation of what was happening. It avoids ambiguity and drop balls, clarifies who's doing what by when, and also it's very public. They are very publicly being put on notice. So now their network of neurons, the central nervous system, is always gauging how important something is. That folder action tells the central nervous system that this is very important. And this is happening in milliseconds. Like I said, the process is 11 million bits per second. So in that few seconds that I've given this, all of this is happening. And I don't want to get into it too much here, but you have this thing for homeostasis versus allostasis. And the allostasis So you have this thing, homeostasis. Homeostasis is getting back to status quo. Allostasis is this upward trajectory. So if you think about working out, people work out and hit plateaus. And those plateaus is really the body becoming super efficient. The body's always working on becoming super efficient. And that's where you get that status quo. And that's why people who lift and compete, they're always changing up their routines, because they say you got to keep the body guessing. What they're doing is they're communicating to the central nervous system that more demand is coming. The central nervous system floods the environment, internal environment, with excess neurotransmitter, which is important for a strong signal. And then the body starts looking at making that more efficient, and then it's peeling away some of that neurotransmitter so it can be efficient, because neurotransmitter is very demanding in terms of energy, and the brain wants to conserve energy. The brain uses like fully a quarter of our resting metabolism. I'm sorry, a quarter of our resting metabolism is all going to the brain. So the brain is using a lot of that. And that's what happens in this kind of a setting. So as you hand that folder, as you talk about the accountability, they're instantly getting, you can even feel it sometimes when you've taken on a certain responsibility. You can almost, not that you're feeling the system flow with neurotransmitters, but you can feel that internal, something happens inside of you. And then by making it very public, now you, as a leader, what you want to do is make sure that you're having the check-ins each time and start that upward trajectory. So that's another conversation. I do more of that on the physical side when we're going through the 7 performance areas: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, and then relationship, professional, and financial. This process is how we build our performance area, each performance area. So we can build up our mental area, we can build up our physical area, we can build up our spiritual area, etc. We get the habit of building up each one of those areas individually so they work well collectively. And then it makes it easy to use it on the right side of the 7 performance areas: relationship, professional, and financial. Tomorrow, I'll spend a little bit more time on the conditioned reaction, but I want to get into the responses because it makes more sense. And this is something I'm trying with this daily, is how it works if I do a section per day. So like I did 2 days. This is the second day on steps 1 and 2, and I'll do a day on step 3. Then I'll do 2 days on steps 4, 5, and 6. And maybe if I work that out, it could be, Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday here, and then Thursday and Friday here. On Monday, I did it. Mondays, you can go on wherever you watch this, you can go check it, and you'll see the videos are still there. So Monday's video, I did cover the 7 steps. I'll give a few minutes. I'm going to end it here, but there's a few minutes in there. You'll see that there's a link. It says Studio Restream. You can click that link and I'll see you come online. I'll see the request to come online, and then I'll bring you on. We can have a real conversation, or you can just put your question in the chat, and we'll take it from there. Otherwise, I'll close it down, and I'll keep this up, whether it's on Facebook or you're watching on YouTube. It'll stay up, and then you can use that website, that landing page, 7stepreset.com/live. You can use that. I'm building that page out, but it's up now. But I want to add a comment section on there so I can go one place to see comments, because I won't always see comments since I'm publishing to streaming to multiple platforms. And then one of the things I'll do, if you have watched this more than once, or you're starting to see how this works, teach it to someone else. That's one of the best ways that you can internalize it, is by teaching it. Because 1, you'll find out where you're missing information, but 2, you're starting by speaking. Remember, I talked about allostasis. By teaching it to someone else, it raises your level internally. And by speaking, that's one of the reasons I go live, because I forced myself into this allostasis. I'm constantly on point here. I can't hide. Once I'm live, I can turn it off, but that's an event. And by speaking over and over, I'm activating neurons. I'm making neurons fire. I'm wiring neurons together by speaking, by writing, by drawing on the pad. I'm activating neural pathways. And you wake me up in the middle of the night, shake me and say, "What's step 3?" I know it's the conditioned reaction. It's automatic, because I'm on point here. I'm in heightened state here when I'm doing this, and by speaking it, I'm activating those neurons. One of the ways that I've been working on this for 5 years, and one of the things I started doing was, initially I was walking and narrating, and it started out as a book. I was walking and narrating, writing this book, and I started to see these themes come through, and I started making the distinctions. And then I started narrating while I was skiing or snowboarding. That was really interesting. This year I'll start doing it while I'm hiking, because hiking, as you know, if you're hiking when I'm talking about hiking like scrambles, where you have to be careful where you put your hands, but I'll narrate, and I use just a microphone that's clipped into my collar, and I'll narrate about this. I'll talk about while I'm doing it. So I'm marrying the physical and the verbal, and it's a way that I've been able to uncover additional things. That's what took me down the rabbit hole of allostasis and homeostasis, because I said, if this was working for my ability to speak or act, what's going on with my internal system? And I started looking at that. And sure enough, there are activities that you can do that are similar to anti-aging, whether it's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it's the mitochondria, like the little organs in the cells. All of these improve from activities like sprinting, etc. And one of the reasons why we age, we can slow down the aging process, or actually not to slow it down, delay the aging process by putting more demand on ourselves. Oftentimes by age 40, we start seeing that decline line happen, the age decline line. We can push that inflection point. Right now, there's many studies and research that say you can push the inflection point out to 75 or so, and then it starts to decline. I believe that when you approach life not from just what are my good habits, what are good habits, but you approach it from pushing out the age decline line inflection point, and you do it with flooding the system with neurotransmitter, I believe you're going to see that thing hit 90 in my lifetime. I did an experiment, started last May. I did an experiment of using physical activity to flood my system with neurotransmitter and tracking what what changes. And I've seen improvement on my heart rate variability. And when you look at heart rate variability, comes in, that's part of the check-in. So if I look at heart rate variability as a way to, remember I said there's many levers, I can look at heart rate variability, and the higher the heart rate variability is, the more access you have to your willpower. Lower heart rate variability correlates with lower willpower. The other correlation, not causation, but when you're in high beta brainwave state, highly stressed out, you're agitated, your heart rate variability will be low, which means you have less access to your willpower. And so there's a connection there. And you can see how it gets too big too quickly, which is why I'm keeping it to the 7-step reset. But under each of these steps, there's so many levers that we can start pulling on. And when I'm working with somebody on a 90-day period through the transformation, we're able to find their weak links and find the big drivers. And that's what I focus on. In the 7 performance series, we find the 4 of the 4, we find which one is the weakest link, and then we find the biggest drivers in that, because we don't want to have a weak link pulling us down. You've heard run with your strengths. I agree with that. But we also have to make sure that our performance areas are at least at a baseline level, so it's not dragging us down. Right. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll talk more about this conditioned reaction step. It's only a quarter of a second, but it's the one that governs our life. It's where the 95% of our life happens. If you agree that 95% of our life is by habit, we'll do that tomorrow, and I'll find a infographic that makes sense to talk about there during the Q&A part. All right, we'll see you.